All right, guys, so we finally have it, the Nikon Z9. And Nikon is the last of the three major camera companies to announce a high-end pro-level mirrorless camera to go with their flagship series. And man, I got this information a couple days ago from Nikon, and I've been poring over it, and it looks absolutely amazing. Let's just say if Nikon delivers on this, this will be probably the camera to beat for 2021. And that's gonna be pretty amazing because we have some awesome cameras already announced in this category right here. I mean, I've been using the Z6 II and Z7 II since they've been announced. So if you haven't seen videos on those, definitely go check this out. But the Z9 is actually on a completely different playing field, and I hope to have the camera soon, so stay tuned for that one. But even these specs and details are absolutely awesome, so let's check them out. So thankfully, it does seem like Nikon is tackling one of their biggest problems with this type of camera, which is that they just don't have high-end sports wildlife type lenses for the Z mount line. So we have three new additions right here. We have the 24 to 120 f4, and this is actually a pretty lightweight lens, and this will be available pretty soon. And you can check out some details on it. I'm not gonna go over too much, but they also have a 100 to 400 millimeter, which is actually incredibly lightweight. So definitely go check that out. Plus, we have an announcement or a development announcement of a 400 millimeter f2.8 with a built-in teleconverter, and this is going to be really exciting, even though I obviously won't be affording this lens right here. I think the 24 to 120 and maybe the 100 to 400 is a little bit more in my game level. However, I know this lens is going to be really sought after. Plus, in addition to that, Nikon is also redesigning their adapter for the F mount. And I'm really glad because I have dissed, I think, that F mount adapter in just about every video I've done because it's so large, it has that tripod foot, I just absolutely hate it. So this new F mount adapter is going to mean much better performance, and just the size of it is going to be less if you're using those older F mount lenses. So I think Nikon, in addition to coming out with this camera, is really going all in with everything in their lineup. So let's talk hardware. So obviously this is D6 inspired. It is a larger body style with the integrated battery grip, and I think this is probably a good decision, which we'll get into a little bit more. It's definitely a larger camera, but it does actually shrink a little bit from the D6. It is about 10 millimeters smaller in every direction, or in the height and the width, I guess. And it is also lighter, which is pretty good. Nothing staggering like the Canon R3 was, but it will be a weight reduction, and I appreciate any kind of size and weight reduction. I mean, this is going to be nothing like the A1 and even slightly heavier than the R3. However, I do think that this will assure Nikon users, this kind of body style and this beefiness is going to assure Nikon users that this is going to be up to take a beating. And even looking at their weather temperature ratings of it's 14 degrees to 104 degrees, which even goes way colder than the Sony A1. I think this kind of body style is going to go a long way, because I think Nikon users and even some pro users have been hesitant to use mirrorless cameras because they're just concerned that they're not up for the beating. Now, the button layout is actually pretty different from the D6. So all of the playback controls basically on that left side have moved over towards the bottom of the camera. I can't say I like this just by looking at it. I like keeping those playback controls separately, but all of that is to make room for a new screen. And it kind of looks like a flip out screen at first, but it is not. It actually tilts and articulates in 4 directions, which, unless you're self shooting, I think this is probably a better thing, because it keeps the actual screen in line with the viewfinder and in line with the lens, which a lot of people like. With a flip out screen, now you have it way over here, which can help for video, but for photos, you kind of like to keep everything in line. So I think a lot of people will like this. The only thing I will say about flip screens is I do like when they can actually close and make sure you don't scratch anything on the back end. But I think a lot of people are going to appreciate this design on here. Plus, this screen is actually getting an upgrade. It is what Nikon says is the brightest screen on a camera, I think is what they said, and it is 3,000 nits. The resolution is also just over 2 million dots. So really impressive screen on this. The viewfinder is only about 3.7, so nothing outstanding right there, but I've used Nikon's viewfinders on both of these. I've had no problems with it and they work really well. Now, a couple of new things here. We actually have this dust resistant coating that will be on the sensor itself. Plus there is actually kind of a shield that will go over the sensor in order to block it from dust and anything else that might get inside the camera. And I say shield because this is not a shutter. In fact, this camera does not have a shutter at all. It is going completely e-shutter for this one. There will be no mechanical physical shutter. And that means a couple of things. So it will mean there's no wear and tear on your shutter mechanism anymore, which is one of the highest wear components inside of a camera. So that should make things a little bit more reliable, but Nikon is going to have to convince us that they are ready to get rid of a shutter, and I think they are, so stay tuned. Also, the card arrangement on here, we have two CF Express Type B cards. You can also use XQD cards, but I think most people are adopting the CF Express now. I love these cards. They're not that large. They are built like a tank. You can buy them in large quantities. They're on sale everywhere. So I am a huge fan of these. The write speeds on these are incredible. I've never had any issues with them. So probably my favorite cards on this one. If you use SD, obviously you're gonna have to get new cards, but if you were to invest in any new card system, this is gonna be the way to go. And Nikon is gonna show you why these cards matter. And one of the biggest reasons is gonna be the buffer, the clearing, and some crazy frame rates. So let's talk about this sensor. This is a newly developed 45 megapixel backside illuminated stacked CMOS sensor. And we've seen this stacked CMOS design in the Canon R3 and the Sony A1. And basically what it allows to do is to actually scan the sensor so fast that you don't see things like rolling shutter and banding, which typically happen when shooting electronic shutter. And Nikon is actually claiming that this is the world's fastest image scan rate, which is why they're probably eliminating the mechanical shutter, because they say that even things fast moving like golf swings, you will not see rolling shutter. So I'm curious to test this, but yeah, I've had the A1 for a while and I have not had any issues with rolling shutter on that one. So if Nikon claims this is even faster than that, I think they're really gonna pull it off here. Also, with an electronic shutter only, you have a bunch of advantages. One is going to be no shutter wear at all. The other is going to be the fact that you can shoot completely silent. And the third, which is one of the favorite things that I have about shooting with cameras like the A1, is that there's no blackout from the shutter. So there's no shutter to come in front of the sensor itself and block that out. So I really love shooting with it. That's one of my favorite things about the A1. I'm happy to see Nikon adopting it and going all in on this electronic shutter. Now they also have a brand new processor. So paired with this, this is going to be 10 times faster than the processor in the Z7 II. This is another crazy claim because I got some new Intel processors that came out today and none of them are even close to 10 times faster. Usually you'll see like 50, 20% increases in speed and things like that. 10 times faster is pretty freaking crazy. So this is going to be amazing, and this is what is allowing Nikon to combine that readout speed with this processor to get a couple of specs on here. So 20 frames per second shooting when shooting in RAW. And I know the first thing people are gonna think is that yes, the Sony A1 can actually shoot 30 frames per second, and the Canon R6 or the Canon R3 can also shoot 30 frames per second. Now the Canon R3 is only 24 megapixels, so that one is gonna be dismissed right there. However, Sony is capable of shooting 30 frames per second at full 50 megapixels. Now Nikon is making up for this in a few different ways. So one is they say they can shoot over 1,000 images in RAW at full 20 frames per second before filling up the buffer. Again, this is going to be that advantage of the CF Express Type B, which is way faster than the CF Express Type A cards that Sony's using in the A1. Also, in eShutter, you can do 1/32,000th of a second on this. So really awesome on that one if you're using 1.2 lenses in bright light, or you just want crazy fast shutter speeds for stopping action. That is going to be possible on that. Plus, you do actually have 30 frames per second. It is just going to be in JPEG only. So if you want 30 frames per second, you can get it in JPEG, but there's an additional feature, and that is going to be 120 frames per second if you can shoot an 11 megapixel file. So yes, in technical terms, Nikon is a little bit slower than Sony by going 20 frames per second. Still probably fast enough for almost everybody out there, and a huge speed increase from their D6. However, if you want 30 frames per second, don't mind shooting JPEG, or want 120 frames per second and don't mind shooting 11 megapixel images, you have those options as well. So let's talk autofocus, because honestly, this has not been Nikon's strongest area in the past. I mean, the Z6 and Z7 II, these are great cameras overall, but the autofocus system, it's not that it's bad, it's that it just wasn't up to what Canon and Sony were doing. Well, this is Nikon's chance to redeem itself, and it looks like it is going to try a brand new autofocus system in here paired with this much faster processor. They're actually capable of doing 120 calculations per second, which matches the Sony A1, which is probably my favorite autofocusing camera right now. And with only 20 frames per second shooting, this actually gives Nikon a few more frames to do something with. Plus, we have brand new AI tracking in this that will do subject recognition for 9 different subjects, which is way more than other things do. We have people, animals, birds, airplanes, cars, bikes, motorcycles. I think that's it. There's probably some more in there too. And no one else does anything like this. I think Sony does 3, Canon does like 3 or 4 different things. So thanks to the new processor, Nikon's also claiming that it can pick up the eye from a whole lot further away. And they've also brought the 3D tracking system from their Nikon DSLR line to these cameras here. So hopefully we have much better object tracking, we have much better eye tracking, plus we have recognition for these new objects and everything like that. And this could be the autofocus system that kind of saves Nikon and puts them online, or maybe even over Sony and Canon. Let's see if they can pull it off. So let's talk video. And what's actually crazy about this is these are some of the best video specs on any camera. And Nikon is the only camera company that doesn't have a Pro-N cinema line. I mean, both Canon and Sony have Pro-N video cameras, and Nikon does not. But take a look at this. So we have 8K video up to 30 frames per second and 4K video up to 120 frames per second, which matches the Sony A1 and exceeds what Canon is doing in the R3. However, in a firmware update coming in 2022, Nikon will also bring 8K at 60 frames per second, which I don't think any other camera is really doing right here. And that's going to be pretty crazy to be able to shoot slow motion 8K in this. Nikon is also stating that 8K can record for over 2 hours without overheating. So this isn't just an 8K camera that you can't use. This is an 8K camera that you could use for virtually everything. The camera will also have 10-bit recording, although I haven't seen a complete breakdown of bit depths and codecs right here. I do know it will have H.264, H.265, and ProRes. I kind of want to confirm, although it seems to say it, that ProRes will be internal at launch, but it looks like it will be. And this will be 10-bit 422 HQ ProRes, and if they can pull that off, that is something that no one else is doing on that. Now, obviously we have that sensor that is capable of faster readouts. We have the processor that's much faster as well. And so this should also mean some of the lowest rolling shutter that we've seen on any camera, plus paired with the dual CF Express cards, we have IBIS, which is already amazing in the Z6 and Z7 series cameras, and getting a little bit better in this camera, especially when compared with lenses that have VR in them. And we have internal log recording on this, plus their flat profile. And I actually really like their flat profile. It gives you a whole lot of room in post and is still very easy to edit and grade. So it's the one that I use the most on it. I think with all of those combined, this is going to be an absolutely killer camera for video. Plus, in the future, we should also have support for both RAW and ProRes RAW, and Nikon has actually been doing stuff with RAW and ProRes RAW for a little bit with the Z6 and Z7 II. It looks like that will be coming and probably a part of that firmware update that's coming next year. Also, there will be a full-size HDMI port, better audio options on this one. So with 8K up to 60 frames per second, RAW recording on this, 10-bit, and all kinds of new features, ProRes, and all of the other amazing things it's doing, there is no other camera that's delivering video specs like this. Now there are a few extra features which I noticed as well. So there is a lock for the IBIS system. So when the camera's turned off, the entire system will lock, and that'll make sure that if you shake the camera, it won't do any damage to the system. It will also have illuminated buttons on it, which is something they did, I think, with the D6 and maybe a couple other cameras right there, but I'm glad to see them continue that. I really like that when you're shooting in the dark. Also, you can adjust the volume of the shutter, and I think this is going to be really important because there's no mechanical shutter, so your only feedback is going to be that noise. And what I really like about this is that you can tune it lower so that you can hear it when the camera is right to your face. However, you're not going to be broadcasting that sound to where an entire church at a wedding can hear it. So this will be really awesome because you can still get that feedback and that shutter sound, but it'll be completely adjustable to whatever volume that you want on it. Now, the best part about this camera, it will be $5,500, which is an expensive camera, definitely out of my league, but $1,000 cheaper than the Sony A1 and $500 cheaper than the Canon R3. And in almost every area, at least on paper, we'll be testing this when it comes in, this is going to be a better camera. Like literally there are only two areas that this might be potentially worse, and that is that it shoots 20 frames per second instead of 30, but it does so with high resolution and has options for JPEG and other lower resolution options to even exceed 30 frames per second. Plus, it is not the lightest or the smallest camera, which some people might not even care at all. So I really think that them pricing this camera this low for a pro and serious performing camera and video camera is going to be absolutely incredible. So honestly, I think that Nikon is probably hitting the nail on the head when it comes to delivering super high-end specs without having to directly go toe-to-toe with Sony or Canon in this one. I mean, think about it. So by going with this larger DSLR integrated battery grip, they're separating themselves from the Sony A1 despite delivering really good performance in all of these areas and pretty much matching all of the internal specs and maybe even exceeding them in a few areas. They are also doing it with a body style that is probably going to attract a lot of sports and wildlife photographers out there who are used to larger, heavier camera bodies, probably going to be using it with these larger, heavy 400mm lenses and don't mind carrying around something a little bit better. However, by going high resolution, they're differentiating themselves from the Canon R3, offering 45 megapixels compared to 24. That's going to make it a much better camera for landscape photographers, a much better photography camera for any kind of studio work. So there's a lot of people, even Canon users, who might be more attracted to the Z9 than even Canon's R3 and might not want to go with the smaller compact system that Sony's doing with the A1. I always criticize that camera in the design. I felt it was an amazing camera, overpriced, and not delivering on the hardware of a camera, especially in that price range right here. So Nikon might have really a perfect recipe for delivering that and for doing it for less money than anybody else. And combine that with what Nikon is doing in video. I mean, as someone who shoots video myself, I am crazy stoked about this camera. It is basically my dream camera for video, and honestly for stills right here too. So if Nikon can deliver on what they have promised right here and do it for less money in the competition, this is probably going to be the camera to beat. And would you take all that if it can only do 20 frames per second instead of 30 frames per second when shooting RAW? You let me know in the comments below. I'm curious to think what you guys think about the Z9 so far. I'm pretty stoked about it. Looking forward to getting it in. In the meantime, go check out the stuff on the Nikon Z6 II and Z7 II. Some crazy awesome things coming around. So I hope you guys are doing well. It's a super late night for me, but I really wanted to get this out for you. And I'll see you soon in a new video.